Good morning. It is March 29, 2023 at 9 a.m. We are about ready to begin a work session on the interesting subject, complicated subject of 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan. And immediately after that, we will go into council time, followed by 3 executive sessions. So let's pop back up again to the work session and let's begin. Ken, are you going to lead us off, or Kathleen, is that you?
Yeah, I'll lead us off, and apologies, I'm just trying to get the slide deck up here. So
No problem. I
handing
just
it off
saw
to me.
you there, so I thought it was probably you.
Right, looks like I have it. Good morning, Council. Thank you, Chair Bowerman. My name is Ken Lader. I'm the Public Works Director, and we are with you today to present an update in this work session on the Northeast 179th Access Management and Circulation Plan. This is, as you'll see, a pretty involved process that has stretched out in time a little bit, but really our goal today is to update Council on what has come before, where we're at now, and then as you'll see today, this plan is a product of many inputs. We've had extensive comments from the public, and the staff has responded extensively as well. And part of that is, I call it the body of work, but we've tried to boil it down today, but we still felt it important to try to capture common questions. So we'll be going through that. And hopefully we'll keep to a reasonable time frame, but it is a lot of information to cover. So, and I'll try to set some ground rules that might help us proceed a little more effectively. So, get started here. So today's agenda, we're going to review a timeline associated with the 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan. We will talk about the central purpose and needs for being met by the plan. We will look at a past example of development that occurred in a kind of a similar situation or area where we did not have planned facilities in place prior to development. And we will look at the former and proposed implementation timeline for the plan. We will also take a brief look at the capital projects in the 179th Street corridor that are currently underway in preliminary engineering. We'll talk about ongoing development in the area and its potential effects without having this plan adopted or in place. And we will then spend a bulk of our time looking at most common questions that have come from residents in the area and concerns that have to do with the plan. And we will also spend a little bit of time looking at public input that has affected change of the plan. And then, of course, we'll have time for questions from council as well. So it's a great deal of material to cover. And so I'd like to suggest, just as some ground rules, if council is willing to please hold your questions at least until I get to the area that is the most common questions. Of course, you don't need to do that. You can jump in anytime. I think it'll just help facilitate things a little bit better. And then during the section on the most common questions, staff will be reading the questions. Gary will be reading those questions to us. And then Gary Albrecht sitting all the way across from me, David Jardine, and Amanda Owings. So they'll be, David and Amanda and I will be responding to the questions as Gary reads them.
So, Madam Chair, so one thing that's missing from this agenda that I thought was going to be the centerpiece was the actual funding package. I mean, that was the hardest work Public Works and the council did, and lifting urban holding, and I don't see it on the agenda at all. Is it embedded in one of these other topics?
Yeah, you'll see on the most common question themes, we do have a finance area, and I'll be talking about the $66.5 million that was originally discussed in the funding option, as well as our current update, most recent update in the TIP. So, yeah, great question. Thank you. Kathleen?
Now, I was just going to add the focus, and thank you, Ken. We'll have that included in the presentation, but this was a request from council to hear about the questions and answers that were coming from the community. But I'm glad that Ken has included.
My question was about the funding, and so I guess that got missed, but maybe it'll be answered.
Okay. And I would say our main goal today, as I understood it, was to really present an update on the plan. So because the plan is a result of the lift of urban holding and our projects being reasonably funded, that isn't the focus, but it is part of the content today. Again, a lot of material to go through. So once we've made it through all of the question themes, then of course I'll be happy to go back through any of the slides that you have questions on and address any additional questions. We have additional staff available as well in the room if we get into a technical area that you might have questions on. So, all right. So briefly, the project timeline. So again, a lot has happened, but back in 2007, Vancouver's urban growth boundary was expanded to include the 179th corridor and this area that we've been discussing. The area was in urban holding, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. In 2015, Connecting Washington funding packages added the funding for the 179th Street I-5 interchange reconstruction. And then in 2020, urban holding removal, the area was with an urban holding overlay. And then in 2020, the urban holding was removed. And I got the ordinance here if that's helpful for anybody. But this allowed development to proceed on 2,200 acres in the area. So, part of the urban holding lift included 4 separate developer agreements that were formed. And in 2021, the access management and circulation plan was begun with technical advisory committee and stakeholder meetings. What you don't see on this slide, I neglected to include, was the 2022 timeline. And going through that very quickly, in January, we had a virtual public open house for the plan. In February, on February 17th, the Planning Commission voted to recommend approval of the access management and circulation plan. On May 3rd, for a council hearing, a council directed staff to provide additional opportunities to gather public input. And then we held a hybrid open house here at the PSC on August 11th, 2022, which was well attended, as we are today, maybe a little more well attended, but it was an evening meeting, I believe. And then in September 28th, we had a council work session. And we're having another work session now, recognizing that we do have new council members, and we also want to update with some additional questions that have come in as part of this work session. So. As far as the need for the access management and circulation plan, new development in this area is expected to change the 179th Street corridor in the Fairgrounds, Salmon Creek, and Mount Vista areas from Northwest 11th Avenue to Northeast 50th Avenue. This plan evaluates the future planned streets to develop interim and long-range plans for the corridor and to guide future circulation and access decisions. The proposal is aimed at promoting safety and mobility of the future principal arterial while balancing the infrastructure and utility needs of development. And just as importantly, the plan recognizes that potential development impacts to critical habitat, wetland, and wildlife are best mitigated on a comprehensive approach to the area rather than through piecemeal urbanization. This planning effort accompanies Public Works design efforts currently underway for improvements along the 179th Street corridor, which we'll be taking a look at here as well. As far as contents of the plan, the proposed 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan is a long-range plan for local circulation as development occurs. The planned roads will be built by development as development occurs. If a property owner chooses to never subdivide their property, a road will not be built on it. However, now that subdivisions can be developed near undeveloped property, the proposed plan serves as a guideline for a connected street network as it occurs. Again, if a property owner wants to keep their property as it is today, no roads will be built on the property. However, the absence of a circulation plan can lead to unsafe conditions and a disconnected roadway network. So on this slide, you see elements that are included in the plan and that were reviewed. So briefly, I did want to address what's not included in the plan. So this plan does not approve or initiate overall development in the area. The plan does not require that property owners develop their land. It does not initiate county acquisition of privately owned land, and it does not review or approve proposed developments. Another way to say that is this plan does not facilitate any developer special treatment or giveaways. We've had some questions around that. More detail regarding the funding and creation of plan elements will be covered in our question and response section. So one of the questions that we also heard was, why don't we get a say-so in the plan? And so we have put together some information for property owners. We have a flyer here today, and we have a flyer here today that people can get a hold of that talks about how to reach out for land use development, information about our capital projects, and I also wanted to say, and we'll cover this later as well, that there's an opportunity with the upcoming comprehensive growth plan update for public participation, and that's something that council has recently approved with the community development department. Widening public roads, the acquisition of areas adjacent to the road is something that the county does directly with property owners, and I have some examples of that as well. So for the plan creation, the planning process involved input from several stakeholder groups to a technical advisory committee, coordinating with the county's transportation planning staff and engineering consultants. So today, we have some of those representatives here to speak to some of the questions. So, the Stakeholder Advisory Committee and the Technical Advisory Committee each met, sorry, I lost my place here. Each met in September, October, and December of 2021 to provide guidance, insight, and considerations for promoting safety and mobility of the future principal arterial while attempting to balance the infrastructure and utility needs of development. As part of this, as part of our outreach, we provided 25,000 postcards for the public open house on August 11th. We updated that mailing list for the work session today, and sent out that outreach to, I think it was approximately 25,000 residents as well. I wanted to go briefly into a past example where we did not have an access management or circulation plan. Everybody's familiar with the interchange at Salmon Creek and some of the challenges that we've had there over the years. So this area, I'm just going to kind of skip through the slide here, but we did see rapid development around 2000 without planned facilities for handling those connections to our circulator, which is 139th. This led to difficult access management along the corridor and ultimately severe congestion back at the interchange. The unfortunate side effect of that was that we spent $133 million working with the state to create the new bridge over 139th. That did move a lot of the traffic north and provided some distribution, but overall it really doesn't fix the problem that we still have unsafe access from local streets to a major arterial for the county on 139th. And these are the kinds of things that we're trying to avoid with this plan. All right, we are almost to the questions, I promise. So, the proposed plan implementation. The proposed plan was scheduled to be adopted during the 2021 annual update to the Comprehensive Growth Management Plan. On May 25th, 2022, Council moved the plan from the 2021 update cycle to place it onto the 2022, I believe the 2022 cycle, directing staff to provide additional opportunities for public input. And that's kind of where we got into the open house for August 11th. The plan can be, as far as implementing it, it can be adopted, the plan can be adopted and implemented if the Planning Commission recommends it for adoption, which it did in February of 2022, and if Council subsequently approves it. All right, just to briefly touch on our capital projects that we have in preliminary engineering right now. So we'll get into the financing a bit more later, but right now, kind of moving left to right, you'll see these are some of the step one projects that were in that funding option 8 that Councilor Medviji you're referring to. The realignment of Del Fell Road to the left there, WashDOT's interchange project, the extension of 15th Avenue. The segment between 15th and 29th is actually a step 2 project, which is also identified in the funding package, but not in the $66.5 million that was originally discussed. But it is a step 2 project that is now programmed in our transportation improvement program. And then on the far right there, you'll see 29th Avenue intersection with 179th. So each of these projects is currently in engineering, ranging from as little as 0% design, where we're touching in and connecting to the WashDOT interchange right there by 15th. 30% designs are complete for almost everything else. And for 29th Avenue, we are quickly approaching a 90% design, and all of our property acquisition offers with the property owners on each quadrant of the roundabout those offers are out with the property owners right now, so about to finalize. So what's not shown on here is also an improvement at 50th Avenue, which is just off the screen. For the sake of the slide, I didn't include it. I do want to add that, so these are the publicly and privately funded and programmed projects that are in the adopted TIP for Clark County. And while they're part of the access management and circulation plan, they reflect only the major and minor elements of the plan as far as the arterials, and not the other roads that will come in with private development that are shown in the rest of the circulation plan. Okay. And then I just want to take a moment to kind of reflect on a couple of examples if I can. So development is continuing in the area, whether we have an adopted circulation and access management plan or not. So this is an example of the North Haven subdivision at 11th and Northwest 179th, so the far west end of the project, the plan area. This is an area on the right-hand side there. You can see in the plan where the plan has laid out a wildlife corridor near the wetlands. I don't know if my cursor will show here. So right in this area, a wildlife corridor, and on the other side, another example, there's a walking trail here that could potentially connect to other development. And then you see the roundabout at 11th and 179th. The development is in construction right now. The roads are in, they're building. We didn't have the plan in place, so we were not able to condition the wildlife corridor that will not be part of this development. We were not able to condition elements for supporting the roundabout at the intersection from this development. We did get an allowance from the developer. They did put in a jogging trail that connects that walking path on the east side there. This is just one example of the fact that development, it will occur in this urban area now, and without a plan, it will be piecemeal and not really provide a cohesive way to connect the road networks or really to prevent some of the more coherent impacts to the environment. All right, so now we're going to shift gears. I'm just doing a time check. We have 12 areas that we've identified from the body of questions and staff responses for the access management and circulation plan. We're going to go through each area. This is a read and response exercise, so I will say I can do a brief pause here if council, if you have any questions for me before we dive into it. And then I'd also say if the format's just not working, if it seems too cumbersome and it's not what you intended, or if it's not purposeful, then let me know and we'll adjust on the fly and do the best we can. So it's about, I don't know what we have, Gary, 17 pages of material. Now, I will say this is boiled down from 56 pages, so I think we did a good effort, and we do want to definitely inform council of what's come before and some of the new questions that we received as part of setting up for this work session. So, hearing no questions, I think we'll proceed and see how it goes. So our first section is outreach, and what we're going to do is Gary is going to read, and then the rest of us will respond, and then we can go back through and follow up with specific detailed questions if you have them. Go ahead, Gary.
Good morning, Chair Bowerman. Good morning, Council. Gary Albrecht, Clark County Community Planning. So the first question of this series of outreach: how was the community informed about the August 11th, 2022 open house, and what opportunities exist for residents to provide comments and feedback? The second part of that is, what happens if I am not a member of an active neighborhood association?
So public outreach and notification for the access management and circulation plan has occurred at several points in the planning process. For the August 11th open house, 25,000 mailers were sent to property owners and residents with site addresses within 5 neighborhood associations in the project area. The mailers were not exclusive to membership within the neighborhood associations. A news release was sent out on July 28th and shared by Clark County Today on July 28th and in the Columbian. Open house notifications were posted on Nextdoor and Facebook. The mailing list was updated and resent for this March 29th work session and included additional press releases and social media postings. The public was invited to provide new questions about the access management and circulation plan prior to this work session.
The next question was, why was the PSC, the Public Service Center, chosen as a location for the August 11th open house instead of a location closer to the project area?
The Public Service Center was chosen as the in-person location for this hybrid meeting on August 11th because of the capacity of the public meeting room and infrastructure available in order for us to hold a hybrid format meeting. Hybrid formats with in-person and virtual options help to ensure that meetings are accessible to those with childcare considerations, mobility challenges, and limited transportation options, and those who must limit their exposure due to communicable diseases. For the August 11th meeting, locations closer to the 179th Street corridor were unavailable because of the Clark County Fair and other seasonal limitations. Open houses about the project were held in 2019 and were hosted at locations near the project area, including at nearby schools.
What was the purpose of the August 11th open house? Did the meeting restart the planning process?
So at a Clark County Council hearing on May 3rd, Council requested that staff provide the community with an additional opportunity to provide input on the 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan. On May 25th, Council directed that the 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan be included in the 2023 Comprehensive Plan Amendment Cycle, and that's this year. The purpose of the August 11th open house was to provide an additional opportunity for public involvement and to gather public input and feedback as requested by the Council. The August 11th open house did not restart the planning process. We'll go into the next section here for historical plans.
So the first question of the historical plans, why is this plan different from plans shared with residents in the early 2000s? And what happened to the previous plans for the corridor?
In the early 2000s, the county studied how to implement the eventual four-lane build out over time. The outcome of that process was to plan for the county to build a core road of 2 lanes and to have development complete the widening along their frontages along the corridor. The result was a patchwork of wide and narrow sections that you see today. You know, we know examples of that as we drive along 179th. The current project plans for the 179th Street corridor are to connect that patchwork of widths, of improvements into a complete 4-lane corridor over the next 10 to 15 years. And I just want to pause for a second and check in with council. Do you have any questions about those first 2 themed areas? Some of these will not take us very long to respond to, but others are going to take a pretty extensive amount of time. So.
Chair?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. It's not so much that I have questions related to the outreach, but there is a step back, and I think explains why there's so much frustration in the community, and that was the decision to lift the urban holding. And it was really, I think, a lack of outreach and a community understanding of the impacts of that, and that now you are having to deal with that. And there's still a great deal of frustration in the community that people thought that they were living in a rural area, and it has abruptly changed. And so this is what we're all having to deal with now. But as for the community's frustration, and you may never be able to answer all of the questions that they have, because fundamentally, people in the community are unhappy with this.
Councilor Marshall, I really appreciate the comment and the sentiment too. I've spoken with several residents, and I think that's a very accurate assessment of where we're at. And I think we know as staff and myself, having gone through this body of work, that there was a lot of planning and discussion, and this does go back decades as far as the area being zoned urban. And I don't know if the main bulk of frustration comes from how urban holding was lifted or when it was lifted, but the fact that it is lifted certainly is a source of frustration now. And we are going to talk more about urban holding in a second here, but I understand the frustration, and I also have a pretty adamant stance that this is an urban area, and it is open for development, and I do feel that that's appropriate based on the process that has gone before, and how urban holding was lifted with reasonable funding for the area, and especially in light of the infrastructure that we are planning to build to support the development. So, but thank you.
Yes, and Councilor Marshall, I know Ken talked about this at the beginning. As part of this process, I believe in the fourth quarter of last year, it did come before council, and council removed it from that year for consideration because of the public feedback and the questions that were coming in. And then at that time, the council directed staff to do additional open houses, engage additional, and then come back in a work session to answer those questions that may not have been answered before in a way that everybody can hear. So that is the purpose of today, is to bring that information back. And they've been working on this for quite some time. And then also with the transition with new counselors, we wanted to make sure that our newer counselors were going to be available as well.
And I will apologize to Chair Bowerman and Councilor Medvigi for what probably seems like an extensive rehash of information, because I know that you both have seen this a few times now too. But it's a
Please
very
don't apologize. It's great.
body of work. So, yeah. All right. Well, let's continue then, because some of these themes are lengthy. We'll get through one more that maybe should be lengthy, but it is. The next one is the planning process. Sorry, did we cover that already?
Not yet.
All right, go ahead, Gary.
Sure. Now, what is the process used to make decisions about the plan? How are staff and council involved in the process?
So just a bit of subtext for this question. Residents have expressed concern that the Planning Commission would approve a plan if directed to do so by staff, and that council input would be limited. Clark County Council has been involved in planning of the 179th Street corridor since 2004. All planning amendments are heard through the Planning Commission hearings, and they make recommendations to the council to either recommend approving or denying the amendment. Council can uphold the Planning Commission recommendation, deny or modify their recommendation for the planned amendment. And as discussed earlier in the presentation, the planning process involved input from several stakeholder groups to a technical advisory committee coordinating with the county's transportation engineering staff, and consultants.
And then that leads us on to our next theme topic of urban holding. So why is rural land in this area being developed?
So in 2007, during the periodic comprehensive plan update, Vancouver's urban growth area was expanded and placed this area into a phased development known as urban holding. In 2020, the council removed the urban holding overlay, enabling urban levels of development on approximately 2,200 acres of land. The goal of the 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan is to promote safe and efficient transportation in the area as it develops, and to balance those goals with the infrastructure and the utility needs of the development. And I'd also add to balance those needs against potential mitigation and impacts to the environment, critical habitat areas, and our wildlife. Land within the urban growth boundary is not rural land.
We're moving on to the next slide.
Oh, sorry, that's me.
Okay.
Forgot I was driving. So we're going to speak to finance now.
So, what is the cost of the road work associated with lifting the urban holding overlay in 2019?
On August 20th, 2019, Clark County Council approved a resolution selecting a public financing plan for public infrastructure in the vicinity of Northeast 179th Street, and authorized entry into development agreements between Clark County and owners of property in the vicinity of Northeast 179th Street. At the time of its adoption, 6 projects were identified with an estimated funding need of $66.5 million. The reasonable funding of these projects was subsequently determined through Ordinance 2020-0202 to meet the criteria and requirements to remove the urban holding overlay. Updated estimates developed for the adopted 2023 to 2028 Transportation Improvement Program, and reflecting progress made in the preliminary engineering on several of the projects, placed this same group of projects, the 6 Step 1 projects, at an estimated $83.2 million. One of the projects, Northeast 10th Avenue, from 149th Street to Northeast 154th Street, has been completed, and its costs are included in that estimate. So I'm going to pause there just to see if there are additional questions about the funding, and I do have some more question and response around it.
Yeah, so I don't have a question, but this is completely missing all the areas that I was hoping we were to focus on, so maybe we can talk offline. I'm sure this is addressing exactly what some or many counselors wanted, but I was really concerned, remain concerned about the funding package in its totality, and we had some recent issues with the governor's budget and the legislative budgets that are going through and delayed timelines. That's concurrency. You mentioned it, but that's the whole focus of what we did in 2019 to release those 2,200 acres of urban holding. So I don't know if we need a separate or maybe even an executive session on where we're at on the concurrency issues and the funding issues. Maybe you'll get into it in more detail in each of these last bullets, but you know, I'm just sitting here going, what, I don't know, is this benefiting the public to have this rehashed? Did a specific counselor ask for this? I don't know, but I'm concerned on the funding. What we did during 2019 was really focused on these funding packages and whether we were ready to do it, whether we had a good plan in place. And right now that's where my questions are focused.
And,
Yeah, I'd just like to
oh,
add in at this point, if I may. Yes, indeed, you're right, Councilor Medvigi. This was scheduled from the direction of council after not just council, but the public had complained, and perhaps rightly so, about the process, and they had questions about it. And they wanted answers, and this is getting those answers out there for them. Let me ask you, Ken and Kathleen, when do you anticipate further discussion in depth on the finance?
we can schedule that any time. I would just say if you want us to work with our engineering staff to update the estimates so that they're current, we could do that. It would take a little bit of time. Right now, the information that I have, we could meet on it whenever that's convenient. And it would be the latest information per the Transportation Improvement Program that is currently adopted.
I'd like to see that information when it's updated. I think that would be most helpful. And Kathleen, could you work with Ken to get that scheduled, please?
Yes, absolutely. We can bring it in on a council time. They did do some updates already and met with our finance team as well. So as Ken mentioned, they can just update some of the estimates. And then, of course, we'll keep monitoring what's happening at the state with regards to funding for the 179th project, and we'll brief council as we learn. But yeah, we can add this on a council time soon.
Excellent. Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
While we're talking about money, you know, you mentioned the 6 projects, and it was initially 66.5 and then 83.2. One thing that was confusing to me when the transportation, you know, the further plan was revealed, it seemed like, you know, I didn't know what the costs were for all of that, or if all of that really should have been included in the in addressing concurrency. It just seemed like there was a disconnect there between what was initially presented and then what evolved.
And I apologize, I got distracted by a technical issue right at the start of your question. If you could just rehash that for me, Councilor Marshall.
Right, it was just going back to those initial 6 projects from which there was a determination about what it would cost and whether or not we would meet concurrency. And then when the larger plan was revealed, it was confusing to me whether or not that should have been included in meeting concurrency, because that's ultimately what the public is going to be paying for.
Understood, and I can speak to that right now if that's helpful, and that might answer some of Councilor Medvigi's questions as well. When the funding package was agreed upon or decided upon by council, it had what were called Step 1 projects and Step 2 projects. So my understanding is that the Step 1 projects, those 6 projects, which you saw a bulk of on the screen earlier, those Step 1 projects made up the initial $66.5 million, but the Step 2 projects were also included in that funding option 8, to be programmed at a later date, I guess is the way to say it. So, and I believe at the time, I know the estimate now is an additional $30 million, and that includes basically those long segments between 15th and 29th and 29th to 50th, so the bulk of the corridor, the rest of the way out to 50th Avenue.
Right, and that makes me wonder, should it all have been included in the determination of concurrency?
And I don't have a good answer for that, but certainly can look into that and get back to you. And we will speak at length about concurrency here in a few minutes. So, but I don't think the answer to that is in our information today. So. But David's taken a note for me to catch that later. So, all right, Gary, if you want to proceed.
Yes. So the next question is, has a budget shortfall been identified? Does the county have the $66 million needed for necessary infrastructure improvements to support development in the area? What are the funding sources?
Thank you. Current estimates show that no budget shortfall for the estimated updated $83.2 million for those step one projects. No budget shortfall for additional, and no budget shortfall for additional programming in the adopted TIP program, the 2023 to 2028, for the two other projects that were included in widening the corridor. The projects are funded primarily by the County Road Fund, Real Estate Excise Tax, that's REAT 2, traffic impact fees, and grants. Major components of the County Road Fund include property tax and motor fuel tax. County Road Fund makes up approximately a third of the estimated funding source for the 2023 to 28 Transportation Improvement Program. And I guess I would just reiterate, based on some of the questions, our current forecasts and our forecasts that we use for the current Transportation Improvement Program show that we are funded without a budget shortfall for these projects.
Chair, if I may. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I did have a question about this, and I'm curious how up to date is that information, and is it including current trends that we're seeing significant drop in the amount of motor fuel tax, and then REAT has been hammered recently?
Yes, thank you, Councilor Young. The current estimate is based on what we put together for the adoption of the TIP in December of last year. So I would say it doesn't include some of the current trends with REAT, certainly, or the concerns there. And we have not adjusted our motor fuel revenue expectations yet, but that is a conversation that we have often about how that may be affected in the future with more electric vehicle use. So right now, we believe this is current and up to date through December of last year. So.
Okay.
All right, the next question is, how are impact fees from developers used to support road infrastructure projects?
Hit this button here. Good morning, Council. David Jardine, Transportation Concurrency, and I'll be answering this question. Yes, sir. Sorry about that. Clark County collects traffic impact fees from new development based on development's projected impact on the transportation system. Proceeds from the program are used to fund capital projects that accommodate growth and provide additional capacity to the major transportation system. Clark County has established different traffic impact fee districts to fund portions of projects listed in the capital facilities plan. The traffic impact fee associated with the development project is based on several factors, including the number of daily vehicle trips the development is projected to generate.
Chair, if I may, I've got a question on that one as well.
Is this a good time for that, staff?
Fine.
Shall we wait till the end of the section?
That's the end of the section for finance.
Okay, go ahead, Councilor.
So I was curious about, there was a conversation, and I've been meaning to look back on it in a planning commission meeting about the potential loss of millions in traffic impact fees. I don't really expect an answer on that, but that's something I would like clarification of eventually, and perhaps that can be part of the budget discussion later on.
Yeah, absolutely. We can follow up with that and get specific information for you.
Thank you.
So the next theme is development agreements. The first question is, how will our property taxes be impacted to fund development and maintenance of the roads?
So this proposal is a transportation planning effort, and we do not fund development. The cost for development is paid for by the development. Additionally, Clark County collects traffic impact fees from new developments based on the development's projected impact on the transportation system. Proceeds from the program are used to fund capital improvements, much like I showed you on our slide there, to accommodate growth and provide additional capacity to the major arterials and minor arterials in the transportation system.
What is the status of development agreements for the area?
Development agreements were approved by council and executed with the passage of Resolution 2019-0805, 2019-10-01, and 2020-0104. I'm not going to read all the numbers that go with the auditor files. I'll spare us that. But any proposals to amend those development agreements would be submitted to council for consideration and require council approval. The North Haven and Ramble Creek developments are currently building infrastructure. Three Creeks development is at the pre-application stage of their development, and the M&H development has final construction plan approval as of August 15th, 2022.
On what day will development occur in our area? How many homes and structures will be impacted by any new or widened roads? Can you describe choices in the site plan layout of current developments?
So I'm going to refrain from my favorite dad joke here that some of council might have heard at a prior meeting, but it basically ends with nobody knows. We don't know specific dates. There are no specific dates as the access management plan and circulation plan would be used and implemented as the subdivisions are built. So the site layouts and local roads will be created and built by developers. This plan is proposed to guide the development to build an efficient, connected street system that will minimize impacts to the environment rather than a piecemeal approach with the individual developments. Approval of the plan would allow the county to guide access management and circulation of roadways as the development occurs.
Are the trail easements and habitat buffers setbacks at the Woolham Development Code compliant?
This development, the North Haven development, occurred before the access management and circulation plan adoption. However, the land use hearings examiner final order for the North Haven subdivision PUD indicates that the habitat buffers in the subdivision were determined to be in compliance with Clark County Code. Trail easements are outside of the wetland buffer and riparian buffer. All development in unincorporated and rural Clark County must comply with the standards and regulations in Subtitle 40.4, Critical Areas and Shorelines.
What is happening on Northwest 184th Street? Are you widening the street or making other improvements? If so, what are the minimum easements you will require between the road and the homes on this street?
Northwest 184th Street is classified as a neighborhood circulator. This classification requires a 54-foot right-of-way, and the right-of-way today varies in width around 45 feet. If development is proposed, which has frontage on Northwest 184th Street, the development would be conditioned to dedicate the additional 5 feet, approximate 5 feet on each side, widen the roadway, and build sidewalks. Existing homes that do not redevelop or subdivided land will not be required to build road improvements.
If 184th develops, will you lay sewer at the same time, and will residents be forced to connect? What about other utilities?
New development will be required to connect to sanitary sewer. If you choose to never subdivide your property, you will not be required to connect to sewer. And there are several properties in developed neighborhoods that are still on septic systems because they never redeveloped their lots or their parcels. The water and sewer are the main urban infrastructure utilities where this would be in effect. So water would follow the same as sewer. A property could stay on a well if they chose not to redevelop.
That's it for our theme questions around development agreements. Moving on to concurrency. Why is development occurring before the corridor improvements are complete? How is concurrency defined?
For transportation infrastructure, the Growth Management Act requires that improvements or strategies to accommodate development impacts need to be made concurrently with land development. Per statute, concurrent with the development is defined by the GMA, the Growth Management Act, to mean that any needed improvements or strategies are in place at the time of development, or that financial commitment is in place to complete the improvements or strategies within 6 years.
How is concurrency measured? When does the 6-year time frame concurrency begin, and how does it relate to the lifting of urban holding? County staff indicated this plan will take 8 to 10 years. How will concurrency requirements be met?
Concurrency is the development of an area, concurrency is the development of an area being sufficiently supported by the area's infrastructure. Concurrency is a dynamic process, and although complicated, it is a measurable interaction between economic development and its supporting processes. The 6-year timeframe for concurrency relates to whether an intersection or corridor can be considered in place or reasonably funded as operational to support development. The requirements for concurrency are not static and are based on the timelines of associated developments. Level of service and traffic model predictions for the corridor reflect the county's strategy to provide infrastructure improvements in the corridor. Initial projects improve capacity and safety at intersection points and remove congestion near the Interstate 5 Northeast 179th interchange. Later projects provide improvements connecting the intersections and providing for safer, more efficient travel to and from the interchange. The 6 years is not a stationary point along the corridor, but will always reflect the development occurring and the level of service that the county's core arterials can provide to support the growth in the area. The county has a continuing strategy in place with its transportation improvement program to meet this need both financially and structurally.
And if I could just add one thing there, David mentioned the fact that we do initial projects to improve the capacity at the intersections, and then the later projects to provide the connectivity. And that gets back to the question about the step 1 and step 2 projects and concurrency as far as the funding option that was approved and adopted.
Just to keep this rolling along, the next question was concurrency or the necessity of expanding Northeast 179th Street to 2 lanes of travel in each direction considered when the urban holding was lifted in 2020.
Yes, it was. And as we mentioned, a financial strategy regarding concurrency was included when urban holding was lifted in 2020. Current and future development are required to meet Clark County concurrency development standards and determine operating levels of the corridor and intersections.
That's it for concurrency. On the last slide is the last themed question on this slide is congestion. What is the arterial atlas and how does it impact decisions related to the 179th Street access management and circulation plan?
The arterial atlas is a supporting document to the comprehensive plan, which defines the future roadway system in terms of role, function, and cross-section of county roadways. Existing and proposed arterials and collectors are shown on the current atlas, and updates to the arterial atlas are considered as part of a comprehensive plan amendment process.
and this plan provides some slight adjustments to that atlas. 179th and several other roadways are already shown there. The arterial atlas also serves as a guide for future development so that when developers need to start looking at their proposals, they can anticipate new roads, new connections, and the capital projects that will impact their development. This atlas feeds into the Regional Transportation Plan, which is managed by RTC, the Regional Transportation Council. And this addresses regional transportation planning needs and solutions, and this affects multiple jurisdictions. And as you know, RTC is the regional organization that manages transportation for the three-county area of Clark, Skamania, and Klickitat counties.
Was the long-term capacity of a 4-lane 179th Street corridor considered when the urban holding overlay was lifted in 2020?
Yes, long-term capacity was reviewed, and a 4-lane configuration was shown to be adequate to serve the growth in this corridor. The long-term capacity was determined through the travel demand model, and this is something that's managed by RTC. It's a software program that looks at traffic movement at that regional level. Our traffic engineering team used the zoning from the urban holding designation and typical development densities to anticipate new trips, and many calculations were conducted even under very conservative estimates. And after entering the general trip information, the team further refined the travel demand model by adding in some of the local streets where we know developments are happening. Those specific refinements were made. And updating this model is a pretty big deal. It's careful collaboration with RTC. Together they agreed, the consulting team and RTC agreed on a methodology, and we're very careful not to undercount traffic. And updating this 179th corridor will have an impact on the rest of the travel demand model, so once it's in place.
With the proposed changes, will Northeast 179th Street be able to handle the projected traffic volume? Were traffic flow patterns analyzed to create the plan?
The projected number of trips assumes that all the land is developed as currently zoned on all the roads within the area. Those numbers are used as a demonstration tool to show that additional trips will occur in this corridor, but are not used to determine the exact road capacity. The road capacity and the size is based on that travel demand model exercise, which shows that 179th can accommodate the projected travel levels through the year 2047.
Ken, can you move it to the next slide, please?
Apparently I can't. Hang on. Wrong button. There you go.
Traffic patterns is our next topic. Were long-term traffic flow patterns analyzed to create the plan?
Yes, the plan is going to supplement the 20-year comprehensive plan and arterial atlas. And as I mentioned, travel volumes were projected through 2047.
What level of detail was used in creating the traffic projections, specifically projections for Northeast 179th Street and Northeast 50th Avenue?
So as a starting point, the future growth conditions were loaded into that travel demand model, and this was based off the zoning that was already established. This uses the 2040 RTC travel demand model, and that is based on industry standards of the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, academic research number 765. These methodologies were used to determine that travel forecasting. The travel demand model as provided showed higher than expected volumes around 29th and 50th Avenue due to model zone connectors loading trips onto the arterials instead of the future collectors. And so the refinement was made to put those collectors in place and update that between 15th and 50th. And so once the 2040 volumes were forecast, additional trip adjustments for commercial and residential developments around 15th were layered in. The intersection operations at the lower level, not that regional level, but down at the intersection operations, that was done using a travel modeling program called SIDRA, and that's an analysis software that uses the highway capacity manual methodologies. So with opening year volumes, future volumes were forecast using the travel demand model, and the same adjustments were made kind of at that lower level. We also applied a 1.2% annual growth rate from that 2040 time period to the 2047 to ensure that we had the appropriate growth that would occur on this corridor.
Wasn't there a hearings examiner decision that the Northeast 174th Street collector wasn't necessary?
The hearings examiner decision does not support that statement. The site-specific development has two ways to get into the subdivision, 40th Avenue and an emergency access at the west end of Northwest 174th Street. During public meetings, during the 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan process, a resident stated that the hearings, what the hearings examiner said in their decision for M&H subdivision, and that was because the 174th Street was classified as a collector, but that there didn't need to be more than one road out of the subdivision. But the resident asked if this meant that the resident asked if this meant that the collector from the west was back to 179th and would not be needed. But the creation of additional roads accessing subdivisions is supported by the Southwest Regional Transportation Council access management tools. We use these tools to help make sure that we can distribute the traffic appropriately. Collector distributor roads are used to separate interchange traffic from through traffic at the closely spaced interchanges. And this will help with safety by resulting in fewer collisions and better traffic flow along the whole corridor of 179th Street.
Why does the plan propose roundabouts instead of left turn lanes? The plan shows the roundabout at Northeast 29th Avenue as one lane. Will a one-lane roundabout be able to accommodate commercial truck traffic?
The roundabouts are a great tool. They can effectively improve safety at intersections and reduce fatal and major injury crashes by reducing the number of conflict points at an intersection. We have a graphic here to show you the difference between the number of conflicts at a roundabout versus a standard four-way intersection. There's a significant reduction in both vehicle conflicts as well as the bike ped conflicts. Roundabouts are proposed on this corridor instead of left turn lanes, also because they can they have a higher throughput of traffic. They can manage high volumes of traffic in a safer, steady operation. The long-term traffic flow patterns were analyzed as a best management practice in this area, and that included looking at traffic patterns from a number of other cities that have several roundabouts in place. This analysis revealed that roundabouts can safely and accommodate the expected growth in this corridor while managing safety. And I guess we'll get to the next question. Go ahead.
The plan shows the roundabout at Northeast 29th Avenue as one lane. Will a one-lane roundabout be able to accommodate commercial truck traffic?
It certainly can. The roundabout at 29th is designed to accommodate commercial truck traffic, those freight vehicles, with left turns using a truck apron to facilitate those movements. And other large design vehicles can still use the roundabout without using the truck apron, such as a school bus. They don't have to go over that.
What process is used to determine where roundabouts are placed? How can residents participate in this process?
So placing roundabouts along this corridor at the intersections, we took several factors into consideration. The first is that intersection spacing requirements do dictate where roundabouts can be placed. They need to be a minimum of 600 feet apart so that the intersections can operate safely and have room to queue during peak times. The other roads, the north-south roadways, were placed carefully as well, and that determines the intersections. Those were placed along property lines so that there's an even distribution of improvements among property owners and impacts to those properties. The presence of wetlands, the significant topography in this area, and the wildlife impacts also dictated where intersections will fall as well. And as far as how residents can participate in this process, is that when roundabouts are proposed along with developments, those comments can be, when the private development properties come into for land use approval, those comments can be taken into consideration at that time. And if there is slight adjustments needed to where those roads enter or shifting roundabouts slightly, those can be taken into account at that time.
Why is there a difference between the quantity of roundabouts shown during the presentation at 2 and the number of roundabouts in the plan at 13?
So when the presentation in August was when, the August open house was when there was only 2 roundabouts shown, and that was just to show an example of the county capital projects in the corridor that were already starting to proceed through preliminary engineering at that time. So the additional 13 roundabouts were determined as part of this plan, as well as being inclusive of the interchange project roundabouts that WashDOT has determined for the improvements there. Not all the roundabouts will be built at once. I want to note that. They'll be filled in over time as congestion increases, as development comes online, and that travel demand is necessary.
Wouldn't a better location for the roundabout serving Ramble Creek subdivision, previously known as Woodbrook Planned Unit Development, be at their main collector and 179th Street?
So yes, our team is recommending an update to the proposed Northeast 179th Access Management and Circulation Plan as a result of this exact question. And the subsequent review showed that instead of 45th Avenue, this roundabout is being recommended to be located at 47th or the Mill Creek Avenue intersection.
And the next theme question is critical habitat environment in SEPA. Were any environmental impact studies done? Please provide your environmental impact study.
The proposed access management and circulation plan was submitted to Washington State Department of Ecology for SEPA review that identifies and analyzes environmental impacts associated with the plan's adoption process. Individual developments will have to comply with SEPA regulations for their individual development impacts. The state SEPA checklist and determination for this planning effort is available on the project webpage. An environmental analysis or impact study will be completed as required prior to construction of the different development projects. This Northeast 179th Access Management and Circulation Plan is a planning effort and not a capital project.
Are critical habitat environments considered when developments are reviewed for approval?
Yes, critical habitat and environmental factors were considered when studying the potential alignments or roads, multi-use trail corridors, wildlife habitat corridors, roundabouts, circulation routes. All those were considered in this plan. While approval of developments is outside the scope of this 179th circulation plan, critical areas such as wetlands, shorelines, geological hazards, and floodplains are considered during that development application review, and they are required as part of that application per county code, and I can read you the code, 40.350.030B.
The next theme, common question is centered around plan operation. Will the corridor improvements and projects in the corridor be monitored to ensure that they are working as intended?
Yes, there are several opportunities for monitoring this, and will happen in a few different ways throughout the whole planning horizon here. The first is the county's comprehensive growth management plan that's looked at periodically. There will be developer-driven traffic impact studies that are required for large developments, and so every time one of those is submitted, it takes a look at intersection capacity throughout the corridor. And then Public Works will also continue to monitor improvements and ensure that they are operating as intended. The plan overall will be implemented through construction of capital improvements and by development activity. And currently, there are 6 county projects that are, I think you saw earlier in one of the slides, that are in current design, either preliminary engineering or getting close to final engineering. The Access Management and Circulation Plan is a transportation planning tool that guides circulation and access management, which allows properties along the corridor to develop in the urban area. And all the development that occurs on 179 will have to comply with Clark County Development Code requirements in Title 40 to improve public services and efficiency. Title 40 includes land use, zoning districts, and use regulations. The regulations include development review standards for signs, for landscaping, screening, parking and loading, transportation and circulation, stormwater, sanitary sewer, and water utilities. And also included in these standards are the protection of critical areas and procedures for the development and division of land and processing under the SEPA Act, and inclusive of that are the impact fees necessary.
We're coming up on plan implementation for the last common theme question. What is the decision-making process from here?
So with council approval, this plan is scheduled for a public hearing on July 18th, 2023. And if approved, the arterial atlas that we spoke about earlier, that would be updated first, and the comprehensive plan would be updated as well, or amended as well. And these actions are proposed to occur in late July. And as far as construction, local roads will be built by development, and the plan is proposed to guide future development to build efficient and connected streets rather than things being piecemealed. So there's no specific dates as far as when the full plan and all the subdivisions will be built, but having this in place will ensure that they have direction on where those roads and intersections will be established.
And I'm going to pause us there for a second, Gary. So I neglected to get probably the most important bullet in our question and responses, which is the next one. We did receive some additional comments and email questions that came in as a result of the work session. So I do have one more line on there. That's why I'm pausing. But again, just to check in, we are going to go into some current questions that arose as part of the work session preparation, and then we'll be through the bulk of the questions. So, Chair Bowerman, any questions from council before I take the last one?
Are there any, council? May we proceed?
I have a number of questions, but you might as well take the last bullet and when we can deal with them all at the end.
That sounds great. Thank you, Councilor Marshall. Okay, we'll proceed.
So how is the county ensuring the quality of life for residents within the 179th Street Access Management Plan area?
So I'm going to add a little bit of context. We did receive an additional question that I think is related to this. So similarly, a resident stated that the 179th Street Access Management and Circulation Plan is not designed to improve livability of the residents living between 29th Avenue and 50th Avenue along the Northeast 179th Street. So to respond to both of those together, While the access management and circulation plan does not speak specifically to the livability of existing residents, the plan is an integral part of the entire growth management planning process. The approval of this plan would allow the county to oversee circulation roadways as development occurs. Analysis and inputs to the plan demonstrate that circulation and safety are improved for the traveling public, complementing county transportation system investments while accommodating circulation needs of existing and future development in the area. Just as importantly, potential development impacts to critical habitat, wetlands, and wildlife are best mitigated on a comprehensive approach to the area rather than through piecemeal urbanization. This plan will create a cohesive circulation and access management plan for the 179th Street corridor to help guide future infrastructure improvements, including access locations and intersection control. The plan promotes safety and maintains good mobility while helping to protect the environment.
How is the county ensuring that existing residents have their ability to provide input when it comes to the future of their community, not just be presented to, but actually engaged in planning?
Residents are encouraged to provide input via the public participation plan for the 2025 comprehensive plan update. The plan received council approval on March 21st, 2023, and will be available via the community planning website in the future. The public participation plan provides the public with opportunities for early and continuing participation and access to key decision-making processes with the County Planning Commission and Clark County Council. And I'll be quite frank, as I'm reading this, I understand that there's a missing component that is that feeling of frustration that is tied to what is going on right now with this urban area and the growth in it. I acknowledge that, and the time for a lot of that input, unfortunately, in my opinion, would have had to be back when the original zoning happened and the comprehensive plan was adopted at that point. But we're talking about years ago. So, go ahead, Gary.
What is the council's plan for acquiring high priority lands consistent with the 2022 to 2027 Natural Areas Acquisition Plan of the Legacy Lands Program? And that's in reference to, in that plan, pages A40 to A41. Within the 179th Street Access and Management Plan area.
So in addition to established plans for parks and open spaces, the county continues to seek opportunities for acquisitions of high-value conservation lands, both inside of the urban growth area, inside and outside of the urban growth area. An example of this is a current discussion with the Three Creeks development of potential acquisitions in the habitat areas of Upper Whipple Creek and the establishment of open green spaces as part of this development. The county has also made efforts to avoid impacts to the Upper Mill Creek tributaries, specifically the project that we showed you on our capital plan for the intersection of 29th and Northeast 179th. That intersection will be using 2 bridges instead of fish passage culverts. And this helps to minimize the stream channel and habitat impacts while improving wildlife passage through those areas.
When will the council create a farm preservation district within the Whipple Creek sub-area, either within or bordering the 179th Street urban holding area, consistent with the 2022-2027 Natural Areas Acquisition Plan of the Legacy Lands Program? The same reference to the pages in the plan, A40 and A41.
So for some additional context, the Natural Areas Acquisition Plan of the Legacy Lands Program states Clark County should also explore opportunities to establish a farm preservation district within the Whipple Creek sub-area consistent with this plan's goals and objectives. So currently, there are no plans to create a farm preservation district within the zoned urban growth area for Northeast 179th. The 2023-2028 Parks Capital Plan does include more than $2 million of conservation futures funding towards the following projects that are consistent with pages A40 and 41 of the Natural Areas Acquisition Plan. One, a farm preservation project within the Whipple Creek Subbasin seeking to acquire a farm conservation easement. Two, the Three Creeks Greenway, which I just mentioned, a targeted acquisition in the upper Whipple Creek Subbasin near the 179th Street and I-5 interchange. And three, a future project yet to be identified in the Whipple Creek subarea. So that does conclude our targeted themed questions. I have an additional slide to address how we've taken some of the public input and adjusted the plan based on that input. So we tend to filter things through the lens of the public input, public safety, and circulation into what makes up the final access management and circulation plan. But a few examples of where we've adjusted the plan. We mentioned the relocation of the planned roundabout. That's an update that we're requesting to the plan from Northeast 45th to Northeast Milk Creek Avenue. We've removed a proposed road near Northeast 174th Street that it was pretty clear did not provide needed circulation to a road that will become inaccessible once the interchange project is done for WashDOT. And we also have responded to a request to preserve left turn access along the corridor as we widen it from 15th to 29th Avenue. That would be a temporary left turn access until traffic demand volume requires us to actually use all 4 lanes, and at which point we would construct a median through there and access control, assuming that we would have at that point another intersection for traffic to turn around on in the corridor. So, I do want to just kind of add to this. We did receive several comments that had to do with, can you move the circulator road off of my property? Why are you placing a road on my parcel and not someone else's? So these are areas where we have to reconcile our public input with the best practices of engineering and our standards prior to implementation. So some of these comments, some of these requests can't be accommodated because we're weighing the parameters that go into why those roads are located in the plan where they are. So again, the topography, the environmental impacts, balancing adjacent circulators so that we're distributing the traffic throughout a consistent network. Once we put all those parameters together, we feel that we have the best locations for these roads so that when the development does occur, when those parcels are being subdivided or developed, that we have a comprehensive network in place that will support the area as best as possible. So I do want to mention one other example where we have a constraint, and I think I can bring it up here pretty quickly. Let's see. So this is maybe going to take a second. Oops, I hadn't done that. Kind of a big map, so maybe try this. Oh, you're right, okay. Yeah, this is my error, hang on. Share. Oh. Oh, it's this one that I want. Okay. So this is available on the website. It's a link to the interactive map for the circulation, for the access management circulation plan. I'm zoomed in here, kind of above that area we discussed before for the western end of the corridor. You can see the wetlands mapped. What's a little bit harder to see is that this proposal in the plan for, I don't think you can see my cursor very well, but for Northwest 181st, the proposed, thank you, it doesn't connect all the way through. And the primary reason there is because we're trying to minimize the impacts to wetland and habitat through the corridor. We've got some high-value wetlands or highly categorized wetlands that we recognize mitigating for an improvement in that area would be very difficult for development, and we wouldn't want that to occur. So it's just an example of where there are several factors that go into how we place these roads on the plan. So.
Madam Chair, can I just ask, because I couldn't find it when I looked it up on my MAPS program, where did you move the circle to on Northeast Mill Creek? Can you just put a cursor on it where it was and then move to?
I can attempt to do that. It's on the other end of the project, and I know it took me a few minutes to get zoomed into this area because, let me see, Gary gave me a mouse, so let me see if I can. It didn't like my trackpad. Here we go. And Amanda, can you tell us, have we updated that in the plan yet, or is that a proposed update? As far as the location of the Mill Creek roundabout, oops. Yeah, this is where I'm having trouble with the zoom on it.
Yeah, it's not showing on this map in the right location.
So it would, the circle that's shown there on Northeast 45th, which is right here, thank you, would shift over to the Mill Creek Avenue location, which I'm having trouble seeing on here. Right.
There you go.
Oh, that's, yeah, right here. Sorry, I thought that was 50th. Yep. So right there is where it would relocate to. So closer to our capital project that would ultimately occur at 50th. All right. I think with that, we are at the point where I'm going to open it up to questions.
So the green area that's there, that's wetland and critical habitat, right? You move the circle to it? Is that what you're explaining to me?
That's an intersection that was part of the development there for the Holt Homes. So the field where most of that wetland is mapped is, I believe, still delineated wetland, and then obviously the development would have had to mitigate for the impacts if it's delineated where they're showing the map there.
Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you. I have a few questions you may or may not have the answers to, but I thought while you're here, I'll get my thoughts out. Related to environmental review, and as I understood what you said, the whole plan is not subject to SEPA, but that would be occurring project by project. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And is there an ability to determine cumulative impact so that you're not just evaluating piece by piece? Because I think there would be we'd want to see what the whole impact is.
That's a good question that I don't have an answer for you.
Okay.
But I can get back to staff and try to answer that.
Great, thanks. And then also on the environmental front, I know with the development on Northwest 11th and 179th, there were violations and I think fines incurred related to construction stormwater permits. And, you know, these are experienced developers that I would think would understand and know how to be compliant with those regulations and conditions. And I would hate that it would be just seen as a line item that we don't have to comply. And so I think more closely monitoring and enforcement, because I think it took several warnings before. And, you know, I drive by here, so I've seen it was really pretty much a mess. So that's a concern as we move forward with all this construction. I wonder if you had considered in your planning the impacts of the event center and the fairgrounds and thousands of people being there and, you know, coming in and getting out. And I know from the beginning with the event center, the community, there were promised certain things would occur as far as hours of operation and things like that, and having flaggers. That has really been hit and miss. So I think the community better understanding or re-looking at some of those agreements related to how that traffic is managed with the event center and the fairgrounds would be helpful, and for the neighborhood to understand that and when to avoid those areas.
Yeah, and Councilor Marshall, I can answer that one directly as far as where we're at, or I can do that as a follow-up after this meeting, whatever you would prefer. It's a pretty straightforward answer. Yes, we are aware of the traffic management issues with the fairgrounds events. They are being looked at, but with the current management, we've had to recreate that agreement and make sure that it's being followed. That did not happen with the change of ownership for the management, and that led to some of the issues that you're talking about.
Great. Well, I really encourage you to work with the neighborhood association on that.
Thank you.
Great.
Councilor Marshall, sorry, can I add some more information about the SEPA? So a SEPA was done for this, an individual SEPA. It was submitted to, let's see, it was submitted to Ecology. A notice of determination was published on January 10th, 2022 in the Columbia newspaper. The SEPA environmental checklist was sent to interested parties and affected parties for a 14-day review and comment. So we have prepared a SEPA for this that looked at the whole area.
And where would one find that?
I'll make sure it appears on our webpage.
Okay, great.
I'll give the council a copy of that as well.
Good, thank you.
Welcome.
The I-5 funding for the I-5 interchanges, it will hopefully be coming down. And I wondered if the I-5 interchanges and funding for that, because that'll come from the state, if that was part of meeting concurrency, or is that just a separate issue?
That is a really good question. My understanding is that our concurrency is not based on the interchange development, but certainly it would have an effect on concurrency if the interchange is not built. So our funding package isn't tied directly to WSDOT, but the concurrency for traffic would rely on the interchange being built. And I don't know, Gary or David, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, so concurrency is not part of the access management circulation plan. Concurrency comes into play when development occurs. So, David, do you want to speak to that?
Well, and I think the question is more, what's the effect of the WSDOT funding for the interchange on our projects? And, you know, I think it's probably safe to at least say, you know, we've got good indication from the House, at least on their proposal that has come out of committee, that they will hold the current schedule, that they've added some funding to the WashDOT effort. And I have not seen the Senate transportation budget proposal yet, but we have certainly been lobbying for our strong support for the interchange to be continued on the schedule that it currently is.
And the DOT is continuing with the current schedule of beginning design this summer.
Right, great, thanks. And then I may not have caught this, but on Northwest 11th and 179th, is there still going to be a roundabout? Is that proposed there? Because that's really the headwaters of Packard Creek. It's a difficult, very difficult site.
Yeah, it is still proposed as part of the plan that would be a roundabout.
And would this go back to the Planning Commission, or has it not changed in a significant way to go back to the Planning Commission?
It doesn't, at this point, it doesn't need to go back to the Planning Commission. So we have the current Planning Commission recommendations that we would bring forward in a public hearing setting with the council, and any of the proposed changes that we've suggested, we would make those suggestions at the time of the hearing for adjustments to the Planning Commission recommendation that they did not see, and council has the ability to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then of that 2,200 acres of the that were lifted, do you know, you may not know, how many acres were zoned Ag 20?
I don't know the answer to that.
Zero was zoned, because the overlay was already applied. Got it. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Council, I'd like to ask you, it's 10:42 at this point. Would you like to set a time certain to end the Q&A for today, knowing that it will continue in the future, both when we talk about the funding and, of course, much later at the public hearing? So what is your wish on that? I think we don't
You're
want to
asking
wear
me,
each other
yeah,
out again.
I'd like to set a different date for a full hearing, just focus on the development agreements, all the funding pieces that we were originally presented, and where
Right,
we are
I think
today.
Kathleen and Ken will be setting that up. So let me ask you about today. How about a time certain? It's 10:43. Would you like to set it at 10:50 for today, 11 o'clock for today?
Yes.
Because we could go forever. And we still have a good council time meeting. So I hear a yes. Is that yes for maybe 10:50?
That sounds good.
And
Okay,
Chair, if we
there's
could
three of us.
if we can take a quick pause, we need to fix the computer system over here to ensure that we're recording. And so I think Ken needs to give staff the host access. So just give us a second. We'll let you know when we're ready.
Sure, thanks.
And while Kristen is working through that, I just did want to do a quick clarification. The next discussion will not be a public hearing. It'll be part of a council time or a work session.
No, I realize that. I believe I said that July 18 was the anticipated date for the public hearing. Yeah.
Yes, and I believe, Chair, we're ready for you to continue.
Okay, and we still, it's 10:45. We have set, three of us, the 10:50 time period for time certain to end today. Are there other questions from council now or comments? Well, we certainly don't have to continue until 10:50. So I'm just going to interject right now in case this turns out to be the best time to do it. Your presentation today, Mr. Lader and staff, was absolutely fabulous and right on with what I understood the public complaints to be and what council had requested that you do today. It's really phenomenal to cover so much material in a clear way in such a quick fashion. And thank you for doing that. I'm sure that some of us will have additional questions that will appear maybe even before that funding period that will be talking or making our focus on the funding. And we can relay those to Kathleen during our one-on-ones so that those questions can be relayed to you ahead of time. There's a couple more minutes. Is there anything else from council?
Chair, if I may, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So for the discussion that Ken and I will work together on, will include a financial or funding update. And I think I also heard an update on the development agreements. Is there any other, and then maybe we can include some of the Q&As that council may have afterwards. Is there anything else that we need to prepare for?
Chair, if I may.
Personally, I would like to say that if it is limited to that, it might be helpful because we want to be sure that we can go into depth on the points that you've already made, including funding. I heard another voice. Was that Councilor Young?
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Go ahead.
And you're probably already considering this, but I would want to make sure that we understand, the funding that we were talking about and some of the changes in the amount of funding that we're getting, that we understand those trends and build that into this conversation.
Thank you. And Chair Bowerman, if I may, the last slide that I didn't throw up here when we were going through our technical stuff, we do have a request, of course, that we could hold a hearing. We have a date of July 18th that would tie into the cycle for the 2022 annual review comprehensive plan cycle.
Do you need a vote or is thumbs up adequate?
Thumbs up is fine. I see 2, 3, 4. Okay, you're good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else from staff?
I'd just like to say,
anything else from council?
Oh, sorry, Chair Bowerman. I appreciate the acknowledgement to staff. I know that there have been many hours put into trying to process the information, but also I'm extremely impressed with the effort that has gone into the plan. And I don't think that's always been reflected in our public meetings very well, but I can tell you that I have a lot of confidence in what we've brought to you today. Thank you.
That's good to hear. Well, hearing no further comments from staff and no further questions at this time from council, but with many more to come in the future, I would say that the work session is concluded. And thank you to all of you who were here. And it is time for council to move on to the council time agenda. And council, I have a question for you. It is now 10:50. Would you wish to take a 5-minute break before moving on?
Yes, please.
You've got it. See you at 10:55.